Today on In Her Words, I'm sitting down with Tembi Locke. If there was one takeaway from our conversation, it's purity of purpose. I just love this statement. It's how Tembi approaches what projects to do next, and it's how she puts her whole heart into a project that she's working on. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Tembi, thank you so much for being here. I told Emma I was texting her last week. I was traveling with my daughter, and I was in a hotel, and there you were on Hoda and Jenna. And I was like, oh my God, we have Tembi next week, and she's on the Today Show, and she's talking to Hoda and Jenna. We're so excited. So I'm
Thank
really,
you.
really excited to talk to you and meet you.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, I love the sort of concept behind your podcast and these
Oh, thank you.
conversations, and so I feel honored to be here. And I like a long form. Let's chat it up. Let's learn some things. Kind of conversation.
Oh, great, great. Well, thank you. Thank you. So you're everywhere. You're everywhere. I said I was doing the research for the pod for this episode, and I was like, I've never had to work so hard because something new kept popping up. It was so amazing. So I'm looking at obviously from scratch
Mhm.
and lifted and all of that, and then I'm like, then Bluebird pops
Yeah.
up, and then I mean, you guys, you and your sister, and you on your own. I mean, so many exciting things. Are you pinching yourself a little bit?
I am pinching myself. I am pinching myself. And it is like, the best way I can describe it is, first of all, taking huge leaps of faith. So there's that. And I have to start by saying that because it is something not to be underestimated, particularly when you're a creative and when you're a woman. And in some ways, I am building the bridge while I'm crossing it.
I love that. Yep.
And
Yep.
so I'm aware of that every day. And sometimes that can feel like stress. Oh, we're kind of building the bridge. What's happening? And other days
Right,
it's like,
right.
you know what? We're doing it. We're getting across and it's happening. And I'm able to express some part of myself that is seeking to be expressed creatively
Mhm.
as a storyteller, as a woman, as a human. And that's a privilege. And I am pinching myself every day.
Yeah, I love that. I love that shift because I challenge myself sometimes too to say the stress, the busyness. I need to sit in gratitude of it because people love women in entertainment. They love In Her Words. They love your projects. They want your voice in more things. And so how do we sit in gratitude for that stress and that those long busy days?
Yeah, and it's a reminder, that what is what it is in service to, meaning it's not busyness for the sake of busyness. And
Right,
so sort of
right.
always for me, what I'm finding is circling back to what I call the purity of purpose of the why I'm doing
I
it.
love that. Yes.
It really helps clarify on the more exhausting days or the days when, I feel like, what next? And
Right,
also,
right.
also, 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 let me not underestimate. I also have become aware of the fact that I have to reset and I have to rest in order to fulfill the purpose at hand.
Right,
It's not
right.
just busy to be busy because that is serving no one.
And how do you find that? Do you find that you're letting yourself rest organically? Do you find that no, I actually put it on my
No, I
calendar
have to put it on my
to take
calendar.
those? Yeah. So
Yeah, I have
you
to pull it on my calendar. I figured out there's some core, what I call care pillars for myself
uh,
that if I just build them into my schedule, and then that's how it gets done, and I try to
mhm,
leave gaps. Like I know that my most creative time of day, I know when
mhm,
that is. And so I
mhm.
try to protect at least 2 days during the week when I know that's my zone. And I
Right,
tried
right,
not to put anything on the calendar during that just to see what might land because that's how
right,
I work
right.
intuitively. I sort of like,
Mhm.
an idea will come to me, it'll spark, and then I want to follow it and I want to follow it. But I need the open space and the blue sky and the
Right.
time and the rest. and the restoration to be able to do that.
People don't give thinking time enough credit, right?
Oh,
So we
it's
used to,
everything.
my old company,
No,
we
no,
used to call it thinking time.
it's everything.
And they really wanted us to even put it in our work day. Like, you can't be a good strategic thinker or a good executive or a good problem solver if you don't have time to think about anything. And
Absolutely.
it is something. So with your pillars, we'll get into the work, but I usually get into the free time later, but I'm like, okay, let's just go. This is so interesting. But is it other, like watching or reading or other creativity? Is it exercise, or is it
Oh,
just like completely zoned out? What does help that?
it's a little bit of everything. So I kind of it's everything from cooking and gardening to taking
Mhm.
walks. It's usually actually not watching other media. That's
Okay.
actually usually not my access point.
Uh-huh.
My
Uh-huh.
access point is usually something connected to nature and grounding
Mhm.
myself, because a part
Mhm.
of the nature of the work, producing and writing and creating, as different from being an actor, is it's very much in and of the cognitive and of the head, that has to
Mhm.
always be connected to the heart. But in my days as an actor, what I knew is a lot of the exercises that we did before rehearsal is getting in your body. So for
Right.
me, what I understand is I had try to really somatically reset my body so that the mind will follow.
Isn't that interesting? And
So for
I mean,
me, yeah.
yeah. I mean, even the nature, the fresh air,
Oh,
the walks.
it,
I don't know how many years, because there's been 50 some of them already, that I will think, why do I feel so crappy? Why do I feel so crappy? Well, it's because you sat at your desk all day
sure.
and you didn't get outside. And the next day, it's like, even taking my dog for 20 minutes or whatever, it's like, why do I do this to myself where I don't get out and I don't breathe fresh air and I don't, exercise or just move like that? But it's so true. It's so
Yeah.
true how
And it
much all of that connection helps.
it does, and it allows me to be able to, one, see what's seeking to be lived within me creatively.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
also usually is a portal to my curiosity. And I think that tethers back to childhood, when you're like
Oh,
literally
interesting.
playing in the sandbox,
Uh-huh,
when you're
uh-huh.
literally just riding your bike down the street, trying to like
And
race your
making up
friends,
stories and
and it's that
adventure.
free
Yeah,
state. So
yeah.
in some ways, as an adult, I'm trying to sort of bring those moments into my weekly life,
Hmm. Hmm.
daily life.
No, that is, it's so helpful, and it's really that mind, body, soul, just feeding that,
Yeah.
just continually to feed that. So, speaking of feeding, um, with so I wanted to talk to you, and like I said, when I started looking at some of your new projects, and I'm really interested in I love the idea of Bluebird and what it is, but starting with from scratch and your obviously very personal story and your life to these other stories of other people's. I you were so vulnerable, and you told your story, of your husband and your family and your all of your real story, and now looking at some of these other true stories. I was curious um, if that's easier, if that's something that you were ready to be like, okay, I'm done talking about myself now and telling my stories. But these true stories, and I mean, we know the best stories come from what you know and who you are and that truth. But kind of evolving from your own stories to others' true stories. I love that evolution. I wanted to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think, certainly, well, first of all, having written the memoir, right, which is my most deeply personal
Hmm.
story,
Hmm.
told in my voice, unadulterated, just everything.
Right.
That's what memoir is, right? So from that to the adaptation of the book was the first sort of leap in expanding a narrative and changing it. right? Because it is an adaptation. And if
Mm-hmm.
for those who've watched the series, the character has a different name from me. There are facts that are different. The
Right,
character
right.
who's my mom is clearly not my mom. Like there's so many aspects of that already move the needle from a real life, um, you know, as it happened experience to what does it mean to creatively, for a new medium, expand a story, always keeping the essence and the heartbeat and the pulse of that story there. So, in a certain way, I had the exercise of doing it a little bit from scratch because it
Mm-hmm.
was not the book on the page. It was sort of an emotional truth and a rendering of it, but it wasn't a pure, straight, as I don't think cinema could be or film or television could be from the book. And I told that story. It's good. It lives forever, right?
Yeah.
And if I am going to explore my own inner life, I would do that perhaps in um, creative nonfiction in the
Mm-hmm.
form of a book or on the page. In fact, there's an
Mm-hmm.
audiobook that I'm beginning to sort of noodle with and work on. But now the joy of having had the experience of adapting for screen, to know what that's like to do at the most intimate level, to be able to say, oh, because Attica, my sister, Attica Locke, who is a screenwriter
Mm-hmm.
and also a novelist, and her book, Bluebird, that you reference, is a part of what we're adapting
Mm-hmm.
next. To be, and those characters, that's fiction. The book is fiction.
Oh,
Bluebird is fiction. I mean, it's loosely based
oh,
on some
on
real, but it is a book of
okay.
fiction.
I thought it was based on a true character.
No, 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 no,
Okay,
no, no, no,
okay,
no, 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 no. There's elements that obviously, and you'd have to interview
okay,
Attica
okay.
to
Yeah,
see, like, to talk about the origin story of her characters and all of that. But so, in a way, it's very freeing to be able to work on material that isn't so close to you,
right, right.
and it is freeing to be able to invent where needed, and it was funny because when I was writing from scratch the book
Uh-huh.
and checking in with my sister because she was a five-time novelist and like, oh my god, you've had a career as a writer, like how do people do this? And she said, oh honey, I make it all up. What you're doing is infinitely harder because you're trying to tell the truth of a lived experience. And
Oh,
so
okay.
there that there's beauty in both. There is a project that I can't speak, truly freely about because I don't want to jinx it, that would be based on a person's true life story. And that
Okay.
we would have to, really be in a very intimate and close relationship with that family about what does it
Hmm.
mean to take your story and put it on screen. And Attic and I are uniquely positioned to be able to talk to a family about that because we did it.
And do you think I would think if it was me, I would trust someone like you and Attica to tell my story because you've already done I'm opening it all up and telling my own first.
Yeah, I would hope so. And that is, we really get it. And Attic and I are deeply, um, we're very much about how something is made is as
Hmm.
important as what is being made.
Hmm.
And so the way that you engage with someone who has had a direct lived experience and you say, okay, talk to me about that. Like walk me through all of it. And that's, part of my training as an actor. I
Hmm.
want to know everything, right? And now, okay, out of all of that you gave us, we're going to take this, and this from, and those are going to be our non-negotiables as we go
Okay.
forward.
Okay.
But other things will change. They have to change because we're creating a piece of art. We're
Hmm.
not doing, an exact rendering of what happens.
Yeah,
I
or
hope
you're
that
not
I hope
making a
that answers the
documentary.
question.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. With all of these, so this evolution of you through writing your memoir and then it becoming, and by the way, we girl crush on Lauren Neustadt here like nobody's business. She's been on the podcast. She was at the summit. We love, love, love Lauren and the Hello Sunshine
Okay.
team. Oh.
I could sit here and talk for the next
Right?
20 minutes about Lauren Neustaedter on so many levels. She is, yes, the real deal.
Oh, we
She's
love
full
her.
of heart and passion, and she is someone that you want to be in the boat with when the seas get rough and like
Well,
the storms are
and
coming. Lauren
and
is
talk about
like,
somebody
we are going
that
to do this.
lifts up everyone else around
Oh,
her.
for
I
sure.
mean, we're having conversations about on the podcast and at this summit, and Lauren is all about, no, you want to hear from so and so. No, you want to hear. I want you to hear this story.
She's
I mean, talk
excellent.
about a
She's
champion.
She is
Yeah,
excellent at curating. She is excellent at lifting people, women up. I mean, look, she was the person who Attica
yeah,
approached with From Scratch, when it was just a manuscript. And
it's
she,
so great.
and Lauren, I think she tells the story that, when Attica said, "Hey, my sister's written a book," Lauren was kind of like, "Oh, great." Like just what any
Family.
producer wants to hear. I think she said something like, great, like the valet's cousin also wrote a book. Like everybody's written a book.
Right,
What the
right.
heck? But she read it and we're here now. And the show was made and Lauren, at every turn was right there, really making sure. Talk about trust. Talk about trusting that we
Uh-huh.
could, that I knew my story as close as it could be to the heartbeat and pulse of what mattered and what I was
Hmm.
seeking and what Attica and I were seeking to do by bringing the story to screen. Lauren was like, okay, yeah, we're here. We're going to make it happen.
And her taste. Oh, she just has, I mean, her taste is just, yeah. And I can't imagine a better person for any project. I mean, I would think any project is your baby, but that project is tenfold, because it's your baby you created and it's your own personal story.
Yes, yes.
Is so all of these, I'm hearing about all your kind of your evolution of these roles. So you're training to be an actor and a working actor and a novelist, maybe not planned so much, but became, to write your own story. And then you're adapting it for the screen, and then you're producing and you're writing all of these pieces. Does it help to have all of those skills together? Do you have a favorite? Are you now thinking, oh, I might never act again, or I might never write another, or are they all help? Do they all feed on each other? I guess.
Not only do they all feed on each other, and not only do I not have a favorite because I guess I don't think in that way. I
Hmm.
feel like just like some days I wake up and I want to wear jeans, and other days I want to wear a leather skirt or a caftan. Like they all have a place,
Okay. Okay.
and I sort of look at my creative life. I was thinking about this, and to some degree, everything I've done, I look at as like just a creative laboratory to
Hmm.
play and explore. And it all is additive to the totality of meaning there's parts of my voice that I can sharpen in a certain area and in a certain art form. And then when I now see myself in a different art form, there are places where I can practice other parts of my voice, my creativity. I'm deeply, deeply interested in learning always.
Hmm.
And so I love and need all of these places to do the work.
That's no that we hear that so much from women, and I love the different origin stories of why you became the term multi hyphenate or whatever we want to. But there's so many different ways that comes about, and whether it's somebody that was like, I wasn't getting parts that I liked, so I started writing
Well,
parts,
yeah,
or yeah, that they
for
come
sure.
about in such different ways. But these women that they're not they're not staying in a lane, and they don't even think that way, that they need to stay in a lane.
Well, I feel like, I mean, for me, it is always a surprise to me when I wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm doing this thing now. Meaning it was never on my, vision board
Uh-huh.
to be a producer. It was not on my vision board to be a screenwriter. It wasn't on my
Mhm.
vision board to be a memoirist. What was always clear and consistent for me was that I always was looking for ways to express parts of myself or humanity or a particular experience. And I was always looking for what's the way to
Mhm.
express that. So, for example, as an actor, as a journeyman actor for 20 plus years, there were times when I had roles that were really beautiful and could express some aspect of something I was curious about, or even sometimes what was happening in my own life. And then there were
Mhm.
whole parts of my creativity that could not be fit into or be expressed, to your
Mhm.
point, getting the parts I wanted to get
Mhm.
as an
Mhm.
actor. And my writing came about not because I had the professional aspirations of being a writer, but I always do something because I have to do it for me. There's a question I have in me that is seeking to be answered.
Mhm.
And if I
Mhm.
can't, and I'm kind of stumbling forward, trying to find the right thing, the right art form to explore and unpack that question. And so for me, when I lost my husband after 10 years of being his caregiver, that was a unique
Mhm.
experience that I could not fit into any role as an actor. I
Right.
couldn't
Right.
fit it into um, a one woman show. I couldn't fit it
Mhm.
into, a singular screenplay or an essay. And what I
Mhm.
realized over time was, oh, this is a long form nonfiction story. It needs to be inside
Mhm.
of a book. That is the
Mhm.
scope of this. So now, how do I do that?
Mhm.
And then when the book came out and it was clear that it was Reese's book club, and then it was picked up with Hello Sunshine, and
Mhm.
we sold it to Netflix, it became about, oh, now as a producer, what is my role in this adaptation? And I
Mhm.
knew that I was a first time screenwriter, first time producer. I'm not coming to the table with the most experience, clearly,
Right.
but what I am
Right.
coming to the table with is an innate and an in-depth understanding of the material in the way that no one else on the planet has.
Right.
I'm
Right.
coming to the table with um, the knowledge that I also know how to sit back and listen and wait for my turn. And what I mean by that is everybody in the room, when everyone else has more experience than you do, the best thing you can do, even though you may be the author of the material, you may be
Right.
the
Right.
person it's based on, your best way forward is actually to sit and listen.
And listen, absolutely.
And I knew that I could bring, I wanted to, especially when we got into production, I wanted to bring to our set culture the kind of set culture that I had always loved as an actor and always
Mhm.
wanted to
Mhm.
experience. Meaning, I was the kind of actor, and I still am, I can go on a set and immediately feel the vibe. I'm like, okay, everybody's stressed to the hilt, or this isn't a great work culture. And I was
Mhm.
like, and it always affected me in some way,
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, observe that, push it aside. Now let's do the work. But I thought, what would it be like if you didn't have to have all of that? And so we really tried to, with From Scratch, create a beautiful work culture that was loving and kind and made space for the fact that we're making this really deeply intimate material in the middle of,
Right.
what was still really kind of like the pandemic. We were in the early shows coming back, and we
Mhm.
understood the emotional and mental toll of doing this kind of work. And so we tried to also honor that. And Hello Sunshine was great in
Mhm.
Netflix in helping us do that. I feel like I got off the question, but I think we'll.
No, no, that is, and that one of the questions I was going to, well, two things I wanted to ask that are perfect for your answer are, was there was there any hesitation to let the memoir become something else, to say, I no, I don't want my story on screen, or this was therapeutic, this was cathartic. I Like you said, I know this is a unique story to me, but I don't want it to go any further than my memoir. I don't Was there any hesitation?
I was terrified for sure
Hmm.
because I understood that to do what we were seeking to do meant that we would be putting the story on a global canvas.
Right.
And sure, a
Right.
book is that too, but it means that people have to go buy it or check it out of the library. It has to be translated in X. I knew instantly on Netflix that it would go out in, I don't know, 80, 35 language. I don't know how many languages
Right.
around the
Right.
planet
Right.
instantaneously.
Right.
And
And
there's,
other people's not visions were going to be melded with yours.
which
It's
actually
not
for
your
me was not
pure.
a problem. That I didn't
Okay.
worry about. Actually,
Okay.
I
Oh,
welcomed that.
interesting.
And that's because I'd
Interesting.
had
Okay.
years in the, I mean, my years as an actor, I understood the collaborative nature of the art form.
Yeah.
So that never
Okay.
scared me. Actually, I thought, well, let's lean into that. That's going to be actually, that actually is fun. The idea
Mhm.
that, and what
Okay.
the work then becomes about, how does it not veer too far off into some other vision and
Okay.
lose the heartbeat? But I love the collaborative nature of it.
Okay.
That was actually super exciting. I think when you asked me about the fear, that was just me on a very personal Tembi,
Yeah.
the person who had lived at the mother, the widow, the daughter-in-law,
Right.
the daughter, right? The
Okay.
sister on a very personal level. Like, what does it mean? And so again, when I go back to the purity of purpose, I can, but then what is the why? Why are we doing this?
Okay.
What is the compelling reason to? Because it actually could just live in a book
Mhm.
and be it already, I've done my part, right? I've told my
Right.
story. So
Right.
why this? Why now? And I felt as though we had the opportunity as storytellers to tell the story with the adaptation of a black woman's, an African American's global love story, her
Hmm.
eat, pray, love, which had never been done before.
Right. Right.
So I knew that there was an opportunity to tell the kind of story I had never seen. I had never
Hmm.
seen myself in that kind of story on screen,
Hmm.
right? And I knew that that was a worthy cause. And I
Yeah.
also knew that I wanted to tell a grief story the way in which I, you know, don't always see or had not always seen
Hmm.
on screen.
Hmm.
And I wanted to tell the story of family and forgiveness
Hmm.
internationally, cross culturally,
Hmm.
interracially,
Hmm.
multilingually. And that felt like a compelling first to do on screen.
Oh, it
So
absolutely
then
was.
that
Yeah.
becomes my why. So any
Right.
fear that I have, I could push aside because I know I'm in service to something bigger. So although it was always about at the core, yes, based on Tembi's story, but I knew we were
Hmm.
doing something much bigger than me, much bigger than
Hmm.
my
And
my
right, and who it
life.
could serve. Yeah, who it could help and who it could serve. That's such a unique way to look at it. Um, in Like you said, you're in the purpose of getting your story out there and letting other people touch it. Is It's serving others?
Yeah, because the
Yeah.
writing a memoir is an act of service. People
Hmm.
think it's like, oh, you're just telling your story. No, you're. I'll be really frank. To go in and excavate the hardest parts of your life and offer them up artfully to share is a kind of way of sitting around a campfire and saying, hey,
Hmm.
let me tell you a story. I went out in the woods. I saw X, Y, and Z. I fought
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z bear. And I've come back to
Hmm.
tell you what that looks like. Should you
Hmm.
ever go out in the forest
Hmm.
and have to experience it? That's what really memoir does.
Yeah.
It's why I read memoir. And so it's not an easy endeavor. And then when we bring that to screen, we're doing that in a different way. We're telling
Yeah.
a bigger story. And I say that from scratch. The series is doing its medicine in the world. People are finding it, watching
Hmm.
it. I get messages of how it is
Oh, I bet.
changing them or changing the way they think about love. And I want to. I always knew that the book was at its core a love story about many kinds of love, and we knew
Hmm.
that the series was also that and looking at
Hmm.
every type of love, from eros to agape. And what that meant for me is, if I can be a part of moving the world a little closer to love through the creative efforts that I do in the world, then that is a worthy purpose. And it
Absolutely.
gets me excited, and it also gets me out of the way.
And people can kind of find their own
Yeah,
their
we're
own
serving.
definition in that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, in their own, yeah. And I'm sure a lot of eyes are opened in different ways as they're reading, as they're watching, because you don't think of a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law love. You don't think of, that those aren't the traditional
yeah,
ways, and that's exactly what it does. It shows you
yeah.
all of those
I mean,
ways
there
of
was a
love.
version of From Scratch that, the pilot is essentially what is your classic rom-com movie. They meet, they fall in love, they decide to have their happily ever after. The series
Right,
is what happens thereafter. The
right,
series
right.
then, by the end of it, is what does love look like eternally and across
Hmm.
all of time and space after death,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
exploring that and making space for that. And that's the story I want to tell, because that's the thing I was asking myself when I wrote the book, is like, what
Yes.
does love look like? What does a marriage look like when one partner's gone?
Right, and it doesn't. Yeah, there is no end. And I think that's the message that I watching it, and amazing actors that are in it and the story, but that all of these pieces, it doesn't end. There's
Doesn't it?
no, with whether it's a marriage that breaks up, somebody passes away, family members go, it doesn't end. And it's such a, and then passing it on to our children, and there
Yes.
it's just, or even friends, the piece that friends are involved, and it's not just blood relatives. It's just beautiful. There's such messages there. And I also want to ask you, you mentioned the trusts with Lauren and with Hello Sunshine and with Netflix. uh
And my sister.
what and your sister, yeah, what do did you and Attica want to work together? I mean, was that your plan well before this? But also, now that you've worked with these amazing different platforms and different production companies and your own production, what does your team look like? I guess is
Mm.
what. So on these new projects and that project, what do you create on set? Do you have a core team that you work with, that you and your sister work with? What does that look like now?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a great question. Attica and I think intuitively, and probably there was a time when we were like, we're definitely going to work together, like early on in our, careers. And we were, I helped her get her first agent. There was a project, in fact, Bluebird, she's talked about this initially. The book, the seed of the book was actually a screenplay that was at Sundance. And,
Okay.
um, you know, and at one point, I was going to be involved in this sort of early iteration of it. And then it sort of like, it didn't go anywhere. She had
Hmm.
went on to have, another career as a screenwriter for hire, and then as a
Hmm.
novelist. And then there came this moment where she circled back to this seed that had been in the script 20 years earlier, and she was like, let me look at this as a book.
Hmm.
So in some way, we had been circling the wagons of potentially collaborating, and informally we were. I mean, meaning like I would check in with her about things I was doing. She would check in with me about things she was doing. We ask
Hmm.
each other's advice, but it was very informal. When From Scratch came along, Attica, and she tells the story, when Lauren was like, we actually want to make this, they were like, and we want you, Attica, to be a part of it. Attica was like, wait, what? She was like, I thought I was just giving you guys this thing. I have a whole, and then she was like, I have a whole other, I have other things I'm working on. But then it became really clear quickly that we were going to do it together.
Yeah.
That actually everything had been building up to that moment, right? Sitting in Lauren Newstatter's office, and we were like, oh, we're doing this. And then we then put some formal structure around the
Hmm.
partnership, because we
Hmm.
understood that yes, we were sisters who were incredibly close and who always have supported each other, but now to do this next level of work together, right? And with all of the other producing partners and entities who would come along for the journey of that
Hmm.
making of From Scratch, we needed to have some relationship pillars and some
Mhm.
partnership pillars in place
Mhm.
in order to do the work at the highest and best level that we could do it. And that meant, so we did that. And that looked at times like we would have like sisterly check-ins that weren't had nothing to do with work. We would, and again, we were kind of building the bridge as we were going,
Right, right.
as we were crossing it. So From Scratch is made. We've had lots of learnings from that partnership. And we
Mhm.
did it under fire because that was like the hardest probably thing we will ever, produce in a certain way together because it was
Mhm.
so close to us and to our hearts. So then when we decided to go forward, continuing to collaborate, it was like, okay, so here's what worked from that. Here's what didn't work. Here's what we changed. Here's what we don't like. And what we began to do was we have someone who we work with who helps us when we get stuck to be like a third
Okay.
party who is like kind of like a business partnership coach kind of person
Uh-huh.
where we're like,
Uh-huh.
oh, this is your strength, this is my strength. Where can we not duplicate our work or spin our wheels trying to each do things that aren't our strengths, but like really, and that person helps us to do that. So that's a team member that we check in with. We have our protege and writer assistant, who's Marley Fox. Can't shout her out enough. She's fantastic. And she is working with us now in our new deal at Universal as we're beginning to develop shows. And I
Uh-huh.
think that, Attica and I each separately have people in our lives who are also a part of our informal team, helping
Okay.
us to support us to do the work that we do. So, yeah, I think that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah, that's and do you guys do you actually write together?
Yes. So what we do is we break everything together, like all the
Okay.
stories, and we get it all the way. If we're going to get really granular, we get all the way, to outline. And then sometimes we will Frankenstein things, meaning like take part, you take this part, and then we have another session where we come together, put it together, smooth it over, and we do handoffs. You take
Oh,
it for a
okay.
few days, do your thing at it. You give it back to me, I do my zhuzh. So by the end of it, it's like you can't tell, always the beginning, middle, like who,
Always,
the
yeah.
what.
Who
So
where each of you
it's
started and ended.
yeah. I think that's how we, in terms of script writing, how we
Uh-huh.
do. And I think, but we're finding it's also the process is dictated by the project. Some projects
Okay.
require working differently. Some things,
Right.
the genesis of it is intuitively a little closer to Attica, or it's a little closer to me. Bluebird, those are her books, right?
Okay. Okay.
I'm like, I'm here to be your wing person, to sort
Okay.
of like be your
Right.
checkpoint. But those are the same way in which, there were parts of From Scratch that were mine. I was like, I know this like nobody else. She knows Bluebird,
Mhm.
even though it's not based on a true story. And
It's
so,
her, yeah,
we are kind of
it's
finding our way.
more
Then
of her
there's a
lane.
project that we're adapting, a Jasmine Guillory book called Drunk on Love. And
Yeah.
that really is like,
That's the one with Malcolm Lee, right?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
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 And
Yes.
so that project, we kind of, we have all kinds of ways into that project because it's characters we've never, we have the source material in Jasmine's
Uh-huh.
beautiful book, and now we are, we're meeting those characters in a new way on screen. And
Mhm.
so we have, it might begin with a glass of wine because it's about a Napa wine family, you
Mhm.
know, or begin with music because we're each finding our access points. And I find that, for me, my background as an actor means I'm always looking at the heartbeat and pulse of the characters. And
Right, right.
Attica's brilliance as both a novelist and, a seasoned screenwriter is the turn and the plot points. And so together
Mhm.
we kind
Mhm.
of really, it's a nice partnership in that way.
Mhm. Mhm. With the different formats or platforms, whatever you want to call it, that are out there now. So you guys, you're writing books. You're there's the podcasts, the series, the theatrical, narrative film. Is there Do you think about that as you're starting a project, whether it's a former, a book, or there was the former IP was there, or is something brand new? how do you guys think about where it's going to end up? Like this is a theatrical
Mm.
film, or this is a podcast series, or this is screening series or a streaming series. How do you think about
It,
kind of the end product?
to me, we arrive at the end by being really close to what does this story need and what is going to
Hmm.
serve this story in the best way. And and there are some stories that really are ongoing and need to
Right.
be an
Right.
ongoing series, right?
Okay.
Because they need that kind of open-ended exploration. And then there are stories that really are just limited. You can this is a long form film that is over six
Uh-huh.
hours or
Uh-huh.
8 hours or whatever, and so we kind of let the story decide.
Hmm.
We let the
Hmm.
story decide. I think if I mean, sure, there are, we're discovering that we like to have our hand in different pots, if you will,
Hmm. Hmm.
but effectively it's let the story decide what it's going to
Right.
be.
Right.
And the reason why I love doing Lifted, the podcast, for me is I like the intimacy of it. I like the long form, hang out, explore, don't know where it's going to go, unscripted nature, and the discovery and curiosity in a
Hmm.
way. I love that about podcasting, as I'm sure you very well know. And that is, unique to podcasting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is just,
No,
you're
it
not
is.
going to find it anywhere else in that way.
Right, and it's the ability to sit down and have, you said, such an sometimes intimate conversation, or you don't know where it's going to go, with someone that you may never have met, and
Oh,
it's
totally.
such a unique.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I learn something, more than one thing, in every podcast, and I find myself bringing up things like I brought up a couple things with you today that from a podcast I did 2 days ago
Yeah,
that I like never would have, like it just
absolutely.
like feeded, because these women are just, I mean, we as women and women we meet, they're so interesting and have such stories and have such lessons for all of us. It's amazing.
If I could sit down and have a dinner party with all of this, is like my virtual auditory listening experience of a
Right.
cool dinner party, experience. That is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it kind of is. And I get to have these intimate conversations wherein, for me, again, back to purity of purpose, I came to want to do Lifted because I felt on the other side of having made on the other side of, first of all, being a caregiver, I'd learned so much. The other side of
Uh-huh.
being 3 years, 5 years into widowhood, I'd learned a lot about loss, parenting through loss, being widowed. And I was like,
Hmm.
gosh. And the creator in me, the artist in me
Hmm.
is like, how do I express this, right? After we made the series, I was like, God, I learned so much from these women on set, like these creators, these dynamic voices and vision. Where can I share that? Like, how can I learn more? And that was really the genesis of the podcast. Was like, I just
Right.
want to continue these conversations that I had been having informally on set. And I
Right.
realized I wanted to be women. I realized I wanted it around a central theme. And that
Hmm.
has led me here. And so the second season is all I'm talking to women in the food space. I'm clearly still pulling at the threads of things that are
Right.
familiar
Right.
to me, but also universal. And there are the themes of From Scratch. And these women across, the shared thing, the common thing is they all work in and around the food space, either writing about it or
Hmm.
being an entrepreneur and making cupcakes that
Hmm.
delight
Yeah.
everyone, or making
Yeah.
wine, or being an editor or a chef. But wow, the
Yeah.
learnings. And I bring those learnings into my daily life and I bring them into my
Absolutely.
professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you can't help it. And yeah, it's there's just so much. There's so many. And I mean, I love Lifted because of those same things. There's just so much. Yeah, the podcast space is just so interesting, and I mean, it really has changed so much. And I love what you said about it. It continues on because anything that we do in women in entertainment, I feel like my mind is always like, oh, we've got to get that person on the podcast. We've got to continue to, because we've got to continue that conversation, or I want to meet them deeper because, you're at an event and they're a speaker in a line. It's so hard but when you feel that connection that needs to go deeper.
Well, because again, it's an act of service. This is
Yes.
an act of service because what we're doing is helping women. We're helping the next generation of women who are going to
Right.
be coming up in this
Right.
business. We're expanding the thoughts, the possibilities for what we can do, right? People are listening to your podcast now who are going to be making the next generation
Right.
and the projects that we're all going to love. And it's because
Right.
something that they will hear here
Mm-hmm.
will seed an idea or open up a portal to the sense of a possibility of
Yeah.
something that they can
Yeah.
do. And that's why thank you for having me on, because I'm that story of, I was a journeyman actor who literally was like, I just want to make my health insurance this year. I
Right.
just
Right.
want, because I have a husband at home who has a diagnosis. I have a small child. Like I need that
Mm-hmm.
to now being the person who is producing the shows that get to hire my fellow actors, get to bring in, crews of people, get to and hopefully tell beautiful stories that bring joy, enlightenment, love, reflection to the world. And that's I could not have seen this possibility for myself 10 years ago. Couldn't have really even fully seen it 5 years ago, if you want to be completely honest. And so there's someone out there who's like me, who's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this one thing, but what would it look like if?
Yeah. No, it is. And I think it's one thing with entertainment, or entertainment loosely, but this industry it's so forward facing, and people look at it like, oh, you're doing something, whether it entertains me, whether I laugh, I cry, I scream, I do this. I love it because it entertains me. And one of the things that we really try to focus on at Women Entertainment is making sure that we're looking below the line jobs, we're looking at below the line stories, all of this, because to your point, you're now helping someone's livelihood because of the production that we're talking about. When they're asking you, what does your team look like? What is your, and you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to hire, I'm continue these women cinematographers in my writing room. And what do my craft services people look? Those are all, that's livelihood, that's jobs, let alone what you're putting out for the world to enjoy, and to the content that we all get to enjoy, and how many millions of people that reaches. It's so unique to our industry.
Yes. And it's this beautiful ability to be able to, as I said, for me as the artist in the most pure form, the same person I was as a kid who dreamed of being in television, was like, how can I move the world closer to love through my efforts as an artist? And the other thing I get to do is, as someone who is the creator, who's creating the work that's going to employ people, my job there is to let the work we do together also uplift your life. And I don't say that lightly, because, and I will go back and be very transparent and clear and say, I was the actor who was on set that was like, I hope we go until 8 o'clock, because then we're in overtime and I've made my health insurance. And that making health insurance would change and uplift the quality of my family's life. So I'm always aware that the work we do has direct impact on families. And as a mother, and as a partner, as a wife, that is no small thing. And so I hope people will come to work, enjoy the work they're doing, feel fulfilled, and it enriched their lives. Right. And in beautiful ways.
No, it is. It's so important to look at both sides. I mean, it's that in front of the camera, behind the camera, above, whatever you want to call it. Both sides of those things are as important. And I know we're so over time. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I've loved getting to meet you. But I want to make sure we get out there. So we, from scratch, the series on Netflix. Lifted, we talked about Bluebird coming. We mentioned Drunk on Love. What else? Tell us what else you're doing, what you're excited about, what you want us to watch for.
Thank you for asking. Well, definitely, there's a couple of projects that again, I don't want to jinx them because how things are, in motion. But our goal essentially is to give voice and space and platform to women's stories and women's storytellers that we haven't seen, and particularly women of color, international stories. And that's kind of where Attica and our eye is trained, because, it's kind of like my grandmother would say, that old adage, to whom much is given, much is required. And what I mean by that is, you could look at that as like, oh, heavy, but it's not heavy. What it means is, my goodness, I am here, but for the grace of many women who were like, hey, come along. We want to uplift. So now I'm doing the same thing. So the stories that we're looking at, there's, again, I mentioned the real person story that we might do. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that's going to come together. We are also looking at a few other books to adapt. And we're just, excited. And we love this partnership with Universal. So it's pretty amazing.
Good. Tembi, thank you so much. And we are all going to sit in gratitude of our busyness and our just all of the plentiful things that are coming to us. Don't look at them as stress, don't look at them as busyness, but in gratitude that we are busy and that we all have these things in our lives in front of us, because that is the blessing that is on us.
It is a blessing, and it is a privilege to be able to let your heart lead your life.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.